Now we go over to the studios of ITN in London for the world news. The time is 10 o'clock.
Hello, I'm Trevor McDonald with the ITN World News. We'll bring you the main international developments. The headlines: G7 leaders open crucial summit in Germany. Riot police move in to clear French roads blocked by lorry drivers. And the disabled British scientist who's made the Guinness Book of Records. First, the group of 7 top economic powers has been discussing possible naval action to enforce United Nations sanctions against Serbia. The Italian Foreign Minister Vincenzo Scotti told a news conference in Munich that a draft statement on Yugoslavia called for all necessary means to be used to enable aid to reach besieged Sarajevo and the other Bosnian cities. But it was the worldwide economic recession that set the agenda for the leaders of the United States, Japan, Germany, France, Britain, Italy and Canada.
The leaders arrived one by motorcade in a light drizzle at the former seat of Bavarian royalty for a 2-hour formal start to their annual get-together. As each one arrived, they were met by Chancellor Kohl, who led them along a red carpet to the meeting. Meanwhile, a nearby German riot squad waded in with batons to disperse 500 leftist protesters. 9,000 police in Munich were taking no chances in a city haunted by the killing by Palestinian guerrillas of 11 Israeli athletes at the 1972 Olympics. Summit leaders are not predicting major breakthroughs on long-standing trade disputes, but in a pre-summit meeting, President Bush and German Chancellor Kohl signaled agreement on an important political issue for Mr. Bush, assuring voters back home that this summit will produce jobs for American workers.
Absolutely, it's a yes.
Among the 7 leaders' major concerns are trade, their own economic problems, as well as how best to help Russia and other former members of the Soviet bloc in moving to a free market economy. The Summit 7 were also expected to discuss ways to improve safety at Soviet-designed nuclear power reactors. But the question is, just what kind of agreement can the summit leaders produce? America is at odds with French President François Mitterrand's efforts to establish an all-European defense force. Japan's trade barriers remain a source of friction for everyone, and while the leaders began several rounds of hard bargaining, their wives killed time by holding their own summit meeting and getting to know one another better. Some were obviously old friends. But early briefings indicated that only modest measures may emerge from 10 hours of talk in Munich, spread over 3 days, at a cost of $20 million. Greater help for Russia is still on the cards, though other countries, notably Japan, are cool to a Bush suggestion that Russia might join the G7 to make it a G8.
Before the G7 talks began, Britain was attempting to save the European fighter aircraft project. Prime Minister John Major held talks with the Italian Prime Minister in Munich, and the British Defence Secretary Malcolm Rifkind met his German counterpart in London. The latest negotiations were prompted by Germany's decision to pull out of an air defence deal in conjunction with Britain, Italy and Spain.
A formal but cordial welcome for Germany's Defence Minister Volker Ruhr in Whitehall, despite strong British government disapproval of Germany's decision to withdraw from the European fighter programme. Germany has still not formally announced its withdrawal. It's talked instead of wanting a cheaper plane based on Eurofighter research. Defence Secretary Rifkind will be asking Volker Ruhr what that means. The British Defence Ministry says the 4-nation Eurofighter is the most cost-effective way to meet the needs of the RAF for the next 30 years. They believe costs can be contained despite a German withdrawal. Britain's urging Germany to stay in and buy an economy version of the fighter without its most sophisticated systems. At Manching, near Munich, where the German prototype is being built, workers are incensed at their government's policy. It's a 10-year step backwards for German technology, this man said. If we pull out, we'll lose our entire technical know-how, said another. Nearby at the G7 in Munich, John Major raised the issue with Chancellor Kohl and sought to ensure that Italy's commitment to Eurofighter remains as strong as Britain's. The air forces of Britain, Germany, Italy and Spain do need new fighters, and so far no one's identified a cheaper alternative to Eurofighter that would be as capable.
The wife of France's President François Mitterrand and a senior French minister have narrowly escaped death in northern Iraq. 4 people were killed and 19 others hurt when a car bomb went off in Danielle Mitterrand's motorcade near Suleymaniye in the Kurdish area of the country. Madame Mitterrand and the French Health Minister Bernard Kouchner were at the head of a convoy but were not hurt. They are on a 3-day visit to northern Iraq, where the Kurds have been campaigning for greater independence from Baghdad. Riot police have moved in to clear some of the roads in France blocked by protesting lorry drivers. The truckers are protesting at new regulations aimed at cutting down on motoring violations. At Lille, the French police used armored cars to dismantle the barricades, but as some routes were cleared, the lorry drivers set up new blockades elsewhere.
After a week of inaction, the police finally got their orders today to get the lorry drivers out. Using a tank borrowed from the army, they began trying to clear the main road between Calais and Paris. Some of the truckers were defiant to the last. And even with tanks, the huge juggernauts proved difficult to shift. Eventually, the main blockade near Lille was cleared. But just minutes later, the lorry drivers switched tactics, using their vehicles to form long columns, inching down the motorway at less than 10 miles an hour.
I'm now on the main motorway heading into Lille. Behind me, what's known as Operation Escargot, literally Operation Snail. The lorries no longer blockading the road, simply driving so slowly that nothing can get past.
Caught in the jam, one family from Aberdeen.
I think it's pretty terrible, quite honest with you, but we come in at Dunkirk today. We was told it was clear, so we took the main routes, but now we're finding, of course, we're getting stuck in the blockades.
Where are you trying to get to?
Paris. Euro Disney.
As the chaos continues, the government joined negotiations with the truckers and their employers. But so far, there's no sign of a truce. Libby Wiener, ITN, Lille.
In Belgrade, 40,000 protesters gathered in front of the federal parliament to demonstrate against the Serbian president Slobodan Milosevic. The protests reflected growing resentment for Milosevic's government, which has brought Serbia to the brink of economic collapse. The demonstrations by people of all ages and backgrounds showed that the chief opponents of Milosevic and his Socialist Party are no longer feuding opposition leaders, but the people themselves. Vuk Draskovic, leader of the largest opposition group, the Serbian Renewal Movement, said the demonstrations marked the beginning of a peaceful revolt. Meanwhile, the United Nations has continued its airlift of food aid to Bosnia-Herzegovina, despite continued fighting in the hills above Sarajevo airport.
It was the busiest day since the airlift began. 18 giant transports landed at Sarajevo's airport with medicine, food, and fresh soldiers. These just in from France. The warring factions are pretty much honoring their commitment not to open fire on the airfield. They're also honoring their pledge to keep firing at each other. The UN troops here are actually in a fairly safe place for the time being. Civilians downtown are not. Every intersection is a death trap. Every crossing, a no man's land exposed to snipers in the hills. But people ventured out over the weekend because they had to, because they had no food at home. 16 people who ventured out were buried in a park which has become a graveyard, one of several new Sarajevo graveyards. Doctors, policemen, firemen, a teacher were laid to rest yesterday with honors befitting heroes, because everyone who dies, everyone who lives in Sarajevo, is considered to be a hero. These victims did not get caught in a crossfire. They were targeted by snipers because what the gunmen see in their sights is a greater Serbia with no place for an ethnically diverse city like Sarajevo, the city where the only thing people have now is each other. Everything else has been taken away.
Lebanon is calling for international help to deal with the refugee crisis left over from the civil war. Officials in Beirut say there are now 1 million homeless people in the country. A delegation from the International Monetary Fund is due to go to Lebanon later this month to discuss how to help.
It used to be the American embassy in Beirut. Now it's home for hundreds of refugees. About a third of the entire population of Lebanon is believed to have been made homeless in the war. Some do have homes which are being squatted in. Now they too are squatters. Others had everything destroyed in the war. They look to the government for help, but there's virtually no government anymore.
As you see, we are waiting in this home and hoping that one day, if the government do something for us, then that's the only hope.
For those with money, there's still much of the good life in Beirut, but the aftermath of war is never far away. For the first time, however, all the factions in Lebanon have come together for a conference on refugees, or displaced persons as the government prefers. They come from all over the country. In the Shuf Mountains sits a burned-out tank once used by Druze militia to shell this Christian village. In the months since the peace, Christians have begun cautiously to return. This family moved into an old abandoned hotel when they found their home reduced to rubble.
The Phalangists took our home as a base for them, military base. So now we don't have a home up in the Shuf.
Across the valley, Druze militia guard the palace of their leader, Walid Jumblat. Although himself a government minister, he says the state is unable to help the refugees.
The so-called Lebanese administration, according to me, does no more exist. There's nothing.
Why is that?
It's totally obsolete, with obsolete laws, with people. We have to clean the administration, clean it from corrupt people, and we have a lot.
It isn't just the poor who've been displaced by the war. The middle class have also fled.
People are not actually coming back, and I'm not talking about investors, I'm talking about real people, people that matter. I mean, university professors, intellectuals and things have not come back yet.
There are exceptions. The Marouet family have returned to West Beirut after spending the war years in London. They've bought a flat, though they're keeping on their home in Britain just in case.
It's always a big decision to move a family from anywhere in the world. I mean, not only to a destroyed place or they have no friends.
Here, if you go outside, who knows what's going to happen to you?
It hurts me because I lived in Beirut when it was blooming, and but it hurts me. But now I'm happy that it's going to recover.
Certainly the business sector of East Beirut is beginning to take off again, but over the Green Line, the problems of the homeless continue.
Leaders of Northern Ireland's main political parties began unprecedented formal talks with the Irish Republic in search of a peace formula for the troubled British province. As the talks on the political future of Northern Ireland got underway in London, there were hints of a major breakthrough from Dublin. The former Irish Foreign Minister Jerry Collins said the Republic might be prepared to make concessions on controversial constitutional claims to the territory of Northern Ireland.
Police sealed off surrounding streets and mounted a vast security operation for the talks which were to bring the Irish government face to face with all Ulster Unionist leaders for the first time in the Republic's history. And the British government sounded upbeat.
Well, it's a historic occasion, isn't it? It's the first time for 70 years, and we are all, I think, delighted and very much impressed by the scale of events.
This is the second stage of the talks process, but Ulster's four main constitutional parties have yet to agree on the first, which is supposed to determine a new system of government for Northern Ireland. The Unionists have entered this stage wanting to see the Irish government drop its so-called territorial claim on Ulster. And Ian Paisley's Democratic Unionists say this must be a precondition to negotiations rather than a bargaining chip. No response to that from the Irish government, entering the talks strongly represented by 6 ministers, headed by the Deputy Prime Minister, John Wilson.
We are cautiously optimistic.
While there's little to be shown in the way of common ground, optimists connected with the process speak of a strong momentum, keeping all sides committed to talking. And they say, while there's dialogue, there's hope.
We'll take a short break now, then I'll be back with more of the ITN World News.